The phone call came at 3:47 in the morning. Sammy Davis Jr. was asleep in his suite at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, November 1960, the peak of his career. The Rat Pack was ruling the Strip: Frank, Dean, Sammy, Peter, and Joey. They owned this town, sold out every show, made millions laugh. The world was theirs. But the phone was ringing. In Las Vegas, in 1960, when the phone rang at 3:47 in the morning, it was never good news. Sammy reached for the receiver in the dark. His wife, May Britt, stirred beside him. "Hello? Mr. Davis?" The voice was flat, emotionless. The kind of voice that doesn't introduce itself because it doesn't need to. "There's a car waiting for you downstairs. You need to come with us." Sammy's blood went cold. "Who is this?" "The car is waiting. Get dressed. Come alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going." The line went dead. Sammy sat up in bed. His hands were shaking. May was awake now, her eyes wide in the darkness. "Sammy? Who was that?" "I don't know," he lied. But he did know. In Las Vegas in 1960, there was only one kind of call that came at 3:47 in the morning. The kind you couldn't refuse. Sammy got dressed in silence. Black slacks, white shirt, no tie. His hands fumbled with the buttons. May watched him from the bed, terror written across her face. "Should I call Frank?" she whispered. "No," Sammy said quickly. "Don't call anyone. I'll be back soon." "Sammy, I'll be back," he said again, trying to make his voice sound confident, trying to make himself believe it. He kissed her forehead, walked to the door, stopped, looked back at her one more time, just in case. Then he walked out. The hallway was empty, silent. His footsteps echoed on the carpet as he made his way to the elevator. The lobby was deserted. Just the night clerk, who very deliberately didn't look at him. Outside, parked directly in front of the entrance, was a black Lincoln Continental, engine running. Two men in dark suits standing beside it. Neither smiled, neither spoke. One of them opened the rear door. Sammy got in. The car pulled away from the sands, heading north on the Strip. Away from the lights. Away from the crowds. Into the desert darkness, where Las Vegas kept its secrets. Sammy didn't ask where they were going. He already knew. The house was in the foothills northwest of the city. Big, isolated. No neighbors for miles. The kind of place where you could scream and nobody would hear you. The car pulled into the circular driveway. The two men got out, opened Sammy's door. Still no words. They walked him to the front entrance. The door opened before they reached it. Inside, the house was dimly lit. Expensive furniture, thick carpets. Everything clean. Everything quiet. A man in a suit stood in the hallway, gestured toward a room off to the left. Sammy walked in. It was a study, dark wood paneling. Bookshelves. A large desk. And sitting behind that desk, hands folded, eyes like two chunks of ice, was Tony Accardo. Sammy had never met him in person before. But everyone knew who Tony Accardo was. Joe Batters, the boss of the Chicago outfit. The man who controlled Las Vegas from the shadows. The man who owned the casinos, the unions, the politicians. The man who didn't negotiate. The man who gave orders, and if you didn't follow them, you disappeared into the desert. "Sit down, Sammy." Accardo's voice was quiet, almost polite. That made it more terrifying. Sammy sat. For a long moment, Accardo just looked at him, studying him, like a scientist examining something under glass. "Do you know why you're here?" Accardo asked. "No, sir." "Don't lie to me." Sammy swallowed. "Is this about May?" Accardo's expression didn't change. "This is about you not understanding how things work." Sammy Davis Jr. had married May Britt 4 months earlier. May was white, Swedish. beautiful, an actress. And the marriage had caused exactly the kind of uproar everyone predicted. Death threats, hate mail, the Ku Klux Klan burning crosses, restaurants refusing to serve them, hotels canceling reservations. President Kennedy's people uninviting Sammy from the inauguration because they were terrified of the optics. But Sammy loved her. And he'd married her anyway. The world could go to hell. Except the world wasn't going to hell. Sammy was. Because Tony Accardo didn't care about love. He cared about money. And Sammy Davis Jr. says marriage was bad for business. "You're causing problems," Accardo said. "The hotels are getting complaints. High rollers don't want to eat in the same restaurant as you and your wife. Convention organizers are threatening to pull out. You're costing us money." "I'm selling out every show," Sammy said quietly. "I don't care if you're selling out the moon," Accardo replied, his voice still calm. "You're a distraction. You're making people uncomfortable. And when people are uncomfortable, they don't gamble. They don't spend money. They go somewhere else." He leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're leaving Las Vegas tonight. You finish your contract at the Sands, then you don't come back. Not to perform, not to vacation, not to visit your buddies. You're done with this town." Sammy felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. For how long? Forever. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "Mr. Accardo, Las Vegas is my home. The Rat Pack." "The Rat Pack will survive without you," Accardo interrupted. "Frank will survive. Dean will survive. They're not the problem. You are." "Because I married a white woman," Accardo shrugged. "Because you made a choice that's bad for business. I don't care who you marry, Sammy. I care that you're costing me money. And I don't like losing money." Sammy sat there, his mind racing. He thought about May, about his career, about the Sands, about Frank and Dean, about everything he'd built. And then he thought about something else. Something Accardo clearly didn't know. "Mr. Accardo," Sammy said, his voice quiet but steady. "Can I ask you a question?" Accardo's eyes narrowed. "What?" "Do you know who I'm friends with?" The temperature in the room dropped. One of Accardo's men shifted behind Sammy. Sammy could feel the menace in the movement. Accardo leaned back in his chair. "You're friends with Frank Sinatra. I know that. Frank's a good earner, but Frank can't help you here. He knows better than to get involved." "I'm not talking about Frank," Sammy said. Accardo waited. "I'm talking about John F. Kennedy." The silence that followed was absolute. Accardo didn't move, didn't blink, but Sammy saw it. The flicker. The calculation happening behind those ice chip eyes. "You're bluffing?" Accardo said. "Am I?" Sammy replied. "You know Frank campaigned for Kennedy. You know the Rat Pack helped him win West Virginia. You know we performed at the inauguration." "You weren't at the inauguration," Accardo said flatly. "No," Sammy admitted. "Kennedy's people uninvited me because I married May. But you know what? Jack called me personally to apologize. Told me it was political. Told me he felt terrible. Told me he owed me one." Sammy leaned forward. "And you know what else? Jack Kennedy doesn't like bullies. He especially doesn't like people threatening his friends. Now, I haven't called him yet. Haven't told him about this conversation. But I could." Accardo's face remained expressionless. But Sammy pressed on. "You think you control Las Vegas, Mr. Accardo, and you do. For now. But Jack Kennedy is the President of the United States. And if he decides to make Las Vegas a problem, if he sends the FBI crawling through every casino, every deal, every connection you've got, how long do you think your empire lasts?" The room was so quiet you could hear the desert wind outside. "You're threatening me," Accardo said softly. "No, sir," Sammy said. "I'm just explaining the situation, the way you explained it to me. What happened next is the reason this story remained secret for almost 30 years. Tony Accardo stood up, walked around the desk, stood directly in front of Sammy Davis Jr., and smiled. Not the scary smile, not the empty smile, a real smile, genuine, almost impressed. "You got balls, kid," Accardo said. "I'll give you that. Most guys, I bring them here, they piss themselves. But you? You threaten me right back." He shook his head, almost admiringly. "Here's the thing, Sammy. You're not wrong. Kennedy's been a pain in our ass ever since his brother Bobby started running the Justice Department. And you're right that if you make noise, it could cause problems." He sat on the edge of his desk. "But here's what you need to understand. I can make one phone call, and you and your pretty wife both disappear. Tonight. Kennedy will never even know it was us. He'll think it was some racist lunatic, some Klan member, and he'll move on." Sammy's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. "But I'm not going to do that," Accardo continued. "You know why?" Sammy shook his head. "Because you're more valuable to me alive. Not here in Vegas, but alive. See, if something happens to you, it becomes a federal case. But if you just go away quietly, everyone wins. You get to keep performing, keep making money, keep your wife, and I get peace and quiet." Accardo leaned closer. "So here's the new deal. You leave Las Vegas. But not forever. 2 years. You stay away for 2 years. Let things cool down. Let people forget about your marriage. Then you can come back, do some shows, visit your friends. But you do it quietly. No press conferences, no statements. You just blend in." He extended his hand. "Deal?" Sammy looked at the hand. He thought about May, about his parents, about everyone he loved. He shook Accardo's hand. "Deal." The car drove Sammy back to the sands just before sunrise. May was still awake, sitting up in bed, her face streaked with tears. When Sammy walked in, she rushed to him. "Oh my God, I thought—" "I'm okay," he said, holding her. "I'm okay." "What happened? What did they want?" Sammy told her everything. The threat, the counter-threat, the deal. 2 years, he said. "We can't come back here for 2 years." May was crying again. "I'm so sorry, Sammy. This is all because of me." "No," he said firmly. "This is because of me. Because I chose you. Because I love you. And I'd make the same choice again." He held her face in his hands. "We're alive, May. That's what matters. We're alive." Sammy Davis Jr. kept the deal. He left Las Vegas in early 1961, didn't perform there, didn't visit. Focused on film, television, recording. Built his career in other cities. And exactly 2 years later, in 1963, he returned to Las Vegas. Performed at the Sands. The Rat Pack was back together. Everything went back to normal. But Sammy never spoke publicly about that night. Never told reporters. Never wrote about it in his autobiography. Never mentioned Tony Accardo's name. Because he understood the rules. You could stand up to the mob once. But you never bragged about it. In 1989, 3 months before Sammy Davis Jr. died, he gave his last interview. The cancer had stolen his voice. He could barely whisper. But the interviewer asked him a question that made him sit up straighter. "Mr. Davis, there are rumors that you once stood up to the Chicago mob. Is that true?" Sammy smiled. He reached for his notepad. Wrote slowly. "I didn't stand up to them. I just reminded them that everybody answers to somebody." The interviewer pressed. "But weren't you afraid?" Sammy wrote again. "Terrified. But I was more afraid of losing May." One more line. "Love makes you brave, even when you're shaking." Tony Accardo died in 1992, 7 years after Sammy. He was 86 years old, died of natural causes in his home. Never spent a day in prison despite a lifetime in organized crime. But before he died, he gave one interview to a documentary filmmaker. And the filmmaker asked him about Sammy Davis Jr. Accardo laughed. "Sammy? Yeah, I remember Sammy. Tough little guy. Smarter than people gave him credit for. Is it true you kicked him out of Las Vegas?" "I suggested he take a vacation," Accardo said with a smile. "He agreed it was a good idea." "Why did you let him come back?" Accardo's smile faded. "Because he was right. Everybody answers to somebody. Even me. The story of Sammy Davis Jr. and Tony Accardo is not about the mob. It's not about Las Vegas or the Rat Pack or the golden age of entertainment. It's about a man who understood that power comes in many forms. Tony Accardo had violence. He had money. He had control. But Sammy Davis Jr. had something Accardo couldn't touch: relationships, loyalty, and the willingness to risk everything for love. That November night in 1960, in a house in the desert, two men played a game of chess. One of them held all the pieces. But the other one knew which piece mattered most: the king. And in 1960, the king was John F. Kennedy. Sammy never made that phone call. He never had to. Just the possibility was enough. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, where the lights of Las Vegas fade into darkness, there's a house that no longer exists. But the memory remains. Of a 3-hour conversation between a mobster who controlled a city and an entertainer who refused to be controlled. Both of them terrified. Both of them pretending they weren't. Both of them walking away alive. Because sometimes, in the game of power, the bravest move isn't fighting. It's knowing when to negotiate. And knowing what you're willing to die for. Sammy Davis Jr. was willing to die for May Britt. Tony Accardo knew it. And that knowledge saved Sammy's life.